Around 1300 BC, the Hittite Empire was one of the most powerful forces on Earth. Their armies had pushed deep into Syria, clashed with Egypt at Kadesh, one of the largest chariot battles ever fought, and held their own against pharaohs who called themselves gods. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, they all knew the name Hatti. They wrote letters to its kings, they made treaties with them, they feared them. And at the center of all of this sat a city, the capital of the greatest empire in the Bronze Age world. It was called Hattusa, and it was built in the worst city location in history. No river, irregular rainfall, jagged volcanic rock cut through by deep ravines, winters that buried the plateau in snow, summers that cooked it dry for months. A highland ridge over 1,000 metres above sea level with no natural water source worth mentioning, and 60,000 people who needed to drink every single day. How would they solve this? To understand what the Hittites were dealing with, picture the terrain. The plateau sits at roughly 1,100 metres above sea level, volcanic rock and thin soil, with two streams cutting deep ravines into either side of the ridge. Winters crack stone. Summers bake the plateau dry for months. And running through none of it is a major river. Every other great Bronze Age capital sat next to water. Babylon had the Euphrates, Memphis had the Nile. Those cities had natural lifelines. Hattusa had rock, elevation, and a climate that would kill the unprepared. So why build there at all? The ravines that made the site miserable to live on made it nearly impossible to attack. Approach from the east or west and the terrain drops away into nothing. Push from the south and broken limestone outcrops force an army uphill before they even reach the walls. The only viable approach was from the north, and that was exactly where the Hittites concentrated their fortifications. 8 kilometres of walls wrapping the entire city, a double wall in the upper city with over 100 towers and 5 monumental gateways. The Lion Gate flanked by 2 enormous basalt lions. The King's Gate carrying a war god carved 2¼ metres tall into the stone. The Sphinx Gate sitting on a high artificial bastion with an arched tunnel running underneath. But all of that stone rested on a single assumption that the people inside the walls could survive. A fortress that cannot feed its population is just a slow death sentence. Defence does not fill a cistern. And that is where the engineering begins. The Hittite engineers looked at their landscape and made a decision. Instead of searching for water at the base of the plateau, they would intercept it on the slopes above the city before it could disappear into the ground. The first part of that plan was a series of dams. These were large structures built from compacted earth with vertical clay cores set deep into the bedrock below, constructed across natural gullies and low ridgeline points above the city. When rain fell or snow melted on the slopes, the dams stopped it running uncontrolled down the mountain and held it in the basins behind them. But this dam water had a problem. It collected surface runoff carrying soil, debris and sediment with it. It was muddy and unclean, fit for crops and livestock, not for drinking. The farms and animals outside the city walls were supplied from the dam reservoirs. The city itself needed something else. That something else was the pond system. Higher up on the ridges, the engineers cut a series of large basins directly into the hillside and positioned them to tap into the underground water moving through the slope aquifers beneath. As the water table rose, each wet season, clean groundwater seeped into the ponds from below and the sides filtered through the rock itself, free of the surface contamination that made the dam water unsuitable. This was the city's drinking water. 2 of the most significant of these structures were the East Ponds and the South Ponds. The East Ponds held a combined capacity of around 36,000 cubic metres. The South Ponds held roughly 20,000 cubic metres. Both were dug deliberately narrow but very deep down to 8 metres in places specifically to reduce the surface area exposed to summer sun and slow evaporation during the dry months. The basin walls sat in naturally impermeable marl, making them watertight without additional lining. But clean water, sitting in a hilltop pond, is still useless to a city on a ridge below. It had to travel, and moving it down through broken volcanic terrain without losing it required an entirely different kind of engineering. To carry water from the ponds down into the city, the Hittites built a network of clay pipes, not open channels, not stone-cut ditches. Enclosed ceramic pipes, manufactured in interlocking sections, buried underground. The pipes were shaped as truncated cones, each section wider at one end and narrower at the other. The narrow end of one section fits inside the wide end of the next, forming a sealed joint along the entire run. Archaeologists have recovered hundreds of these sections at Hattusa, many still locked together exactly as they were placed over 3,000 years ago. The pipes were buried in trenches, cut into the ground, and then backfilled over the top, protecting the ceramic from the freeze-thaw cycles that would crack anything exposed to Anatolian winters and preventing evaporation losses through summer. The ceramic was carefully fired to increase density and reduce porosity, and when a section cracked or failed, it was replaced. Evidence of repaired and swapped-out pipe sections has been found throughout the system, showing the Hittites maintained the network continuously across generations. This was not infrastructure built once and forgotten. There were people whose job it was to keep those buried pipes running. The water left the ponds. It travelled through kilometres of buried jointed ceramic pipe, and it arrived at the edge of a city covering more than 180 hectares. Getting it there was only half the problem. Water arrived in Hatusa, but the city could not consume it all at once. What it needed was storage spread across the entire urban area so that water collected in the wet season could carry the population through the long dry months that followed. The solution was a network of cisterns cut directly into the bedrock of the plateau. Researchers have mapped over 30 cistern locations within the city walls. One of the most significant is the Eastern Reservoirs Complex, known today as Do Havuzla, located in the eastern part of the upper city. Two large basins were excavated there, each measuring roughly 60 by 90 metres and 2 metres deep, their floors sealed with clay to prevent leaks. They were supplied both by nearby springs and by clay pipes, drawing water in from outside the city, the same pipe network feeding the rest of the system. The cisterns were positioned in deliberate relation to the most important structures in the city. The Great Temple in the lower city, the largest temple in the Hittite Empire, dedicated to the storm god and the sun goddess, had water infrastructure serving it directly. The upper city's 31 temples, built under King Tudaliah IV in the 13th century BC, sat within reach of the distribution network. The royal citadel of Bayukal, where the Hittite kings ruled and where the clay tablet archives were kept, was fed by the same system. Stone basins and troughs positioned around each cistern served as the final collection points, where inhabitants could draw water that had travelled from a mountain ridge down through kilometres of buried pipe into this carved rock chamber beneath the city. To the people of Hatusa, water was not simply a resource, it was sacred, and the Hittites built that belief into the city in stone. Their ritual texts describe water as the purifying force that separated the clean from the unclean, the human from the divine. Before approaching a god, the body had to be washed. Before any sacred speech, the mouth. Priests poured water over offerings and worshippers. The substance itself was understood as a medium between the human world and the divine. At the southern end of the city, positioned directly against the dam of the South Pond, the Hittites built the Sudburg, a sacred pool complex built into the dam structure itself. Its chambers were constructed from finely dressed megalithic stone blocks, fitted together with the smooth, curved edges of Hittite masonry at its most refined. Chamber 2, to the northeast, carried a lengthy hieroglyphic inscription on its walls commemorating the deeds of Suppiluliuma II, one of the last great kings of the empire. The king stood carved in relief beside the water, beside the same reservoir that fed the city's temples and homes. The pond and the sacred chambers were the same structure. The water that kept 60,000 people alive was also the water the king used to commune with the gods. Engineering and religion were not separate projects in Hatusa. They were the same project. The city stood for roughly 500 years. Ponds, holding over 56,000 cubic metres of clean water, buried ceramic pipes maintained across generations. 30-plus cisterns feeding temples, a royal palace, and tens of thousands of people on a waterless highland ridge. The Hittites did not find a convenient location and build around it. They chose the difficult location for defence, and then solved every problem that choice created. And the principles they worked out on that volcanic ridge: capture water high, move it through buried pipe, store it in distributed cisterns close to where people actually live. Those ideas did not die when the city did. Hattusa fell around 1200 BC, consumed by the Bronze Age collapse that brought down almost every great power of the era. The tablets burned, the palaces emptied, but the pipe sections are still in the ground, the cisterns are still carved into the rock, and the ponds are still there on the ridges above where the city used to be. Hatusa is gone. What it took to build it is not.